quarterback might actually be the easiest position to analyze and draft in fantasy. How do we know which ones we should be drafting? The eye test. We look for the elite guys, the ones that are the most talented, the ones that we know are capable of throwing for 4,000 passing yards or more. And if they have rushing upside, that's even better. But what if you don't want to draft one of the elite quarterbacks? What if you don't have a chance to draft one of the elite quarterbacks? I know for one, I'm not really a big fan of drafting an elite quarterback with good draft picks in my drafts. I feel like I'm much better off taking a running back or a receiver and worrying about quarterback later. So for those with that same mindset and mentality of not wanting one of the high-end elite quarterbacks, how do we go about finding which quarterbacks are the right ones to draft? That's what we'll go over in this video. I'm going to look at proven year-over-year statistics and data of who finishes consistently in the top 10 and who doesn't. And we're going to make a decision on who we think is going to be that next top 10 quarterback if you can't get one of the elite ones. My name is Turtle. This is Outlier Fantasy. And let's roll the intro. So if you're new to the channel, you haven't seen any of these videos, I always look on Fantasy Pros to see who finished in the top however many matters to us in quarterback. I think top 10 is the most relevant. And see how many players year over year carry over that top 10 or elite stature in fantasy football. I am using Fantasy Pros. Shout out to Fantasy Pros for laying all this beautiful information out right in front of us for us to digest. And we are looking, if you notice, at only weeks 1 through 17 because week 18 does not matter in fantasy football unless you play in one of those weird leagues that week 18 does count. I don't think anybody should play like that, but that's just my opinion. And most of us do play in a season that ends by week 17, the championship week. So let's go over and look at the top 10 quarterbacks of 2024 and how many guys were also top 10 in 2023. We have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Both of those guys repeated as top 10 last year. Joe Burrow was injured last year, coming in at number 3. So he's not somebody that repeats. Jaden Daniels, a rookie, obviously can't repeat his top 10 from last year because he wasn't in the NFL last year. Baker Mayfield does repeat at number 5. So we already have 3 of the top 5 quarterbacks from this year already repeated as top 10 quarterbacks last year. Jared Goff is another one. So here we go. 4 out of 6. Jalen Hurts, another one. And finally, Patrick Mahomes is the last one. So that's 6 players that carried over from top 10 from last year, 2023, to this season that just passed, 2024. So, if 6 guys are going to carry over, we need to figure out roughly 4, 5, maybe 6 of those quarterbacks are not going to carry over next year. So keep that in mind. Here I have 2023's top 10 quarterbacks in fantasy. Again, we're using Fantasy Pros to look at these numbers. And 4 of these quarterbacks were able to carry over from 2023 to the year prior, 2022. Here we have 2022. Again, you're seeing the big, I call them almost the big 4. I mean, it's not really fair to call them the big 4, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow's there, so as long as he doesn't get injured, and Lamar Jackson is usually in there unless he gets injured. So both of those guys kind of take turns, unfortunately, of being healthy for the entire duration of a season. And that kind of influctuates, who gets that 4th spot out of those guys. But we know those guys are going to finish at elite stature. But if you notice, when you draft in fantasy, those players go very early in your drafts. If you want a Jalen Hurts, a Lamar Jackson, a Josh Allen, a Joe Burrow, you got to use an early draft pick on one of those guys. And me personally, I'm not a fan of doing something like that. I'm not a fan of missing out on an opportunity to grab somebody that could actually be very viable to your team in a position that you're going to need more later on in the season, like a running back, like a wide receiver. For example, sure, I wouldn't have drafted him with my 4th round pick or 5th round pick, like maybe a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. If I needed a quarterback and it's round 7 and I know that I'm missing a quarterback, should I reach for the next available quarterback? Or should I take a chance on somebody like Brian Thomas Jr., who could end up being a stud? Now this year, I chose that route in my redraft league. I chose to just go out and get a Brian Thomas Jr. knowing that I will get a quarterback later. And if I don't get a quarterback later, they could be possibly on the waiver wire. I know for damn sure nobody was drafting Bo Nix as their starting quarterback. But these guys can be available on the waiver wire. Are you going to find a Brian Thomas Jr. on the waiver wire? More than likely not. Sure, you can find a rookie wide receiver on the waiver wire, but are they going to be as good or even a fraction as good as Brian Thomas Jr. could be, or some kind of wide receiver that's in that range? I personally don't think so, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, let's get back to how many quarterbacks in 2022 carried over from 2021. Now, 4 quarterbacks did it in 2022. Now, let's look at 2021 versus 2020. Now, this was still when Tom Brady was in the league. We had 6 of these guys carry over year. Again, you see Josh Allen. You see Patrick Mahomes. You see Joe Burrow. You see Jalen Hurts. Now let's go back to 2024. We know that in the last 4 to 5 years, 4 to 6 quarterbacks carry over top 10 status. Last year it was 6. I'm going to probably say the number this year is probably going to be closer to 6 again. Could it be more? Of course. But the data shows us that not every single one of these quarterbacks is going to repeat. So don't bake into your ADP that you have to draft one of the 10 best quarterbacks to get a starting quarterback. That's not how fantasy football works ever. There's never a situation where the first 10 quarterbacks go are the top 10 quarterbacks at the end of the season. That just doesn't happen. So if you're like me, you want to ball out on a budget, you don't want to take a quarterback early because you feel like it's better to get other positional needs, then let's try to identify who can stay and who's got to go next year in 2025. First up, Lamar Jackson. Now, I just made the case that it's very likely he could get injured. I'm not wishing for that. I don't want to say I was predicting that this year in 2024, but I was definitely wrong about that. I didn't know if he was going to carry over his top 10 status. Now, in terms of how good he is as a football player, he's my favorite football player. I know what he can do in terms of balling out in the regular season. Whether what you think of him in the playoffs, that's a whole nother conversation. Has nothing to do with us in fantasy. Josh Allen is obviously not going anywhere. Unless for some reason there was a devastating injury, knock on wood, Josh Allen's going to be there next year. He's one of those guys that year over year, we see him finish here. Joe Burrow, as long as he's healthy, he can do it. So that's 3 guys. Jayden Daniels. Now, Jayden Daniels, amazing rookie season. Somebody that I was advocating to draft at the beginning of 2024. Why? Because we know that rookies usually make it into the top 10. We know guys usually don't always carry over year. So that means there could be a chance that a rookie makes it. So that's why I was saying, gotta go grab Caleb Williams, gotta go grab Jayden Daniels, take a shot on one of those guys. Now, obviously, the Caleb Williams part didn't work. That's on me. I'll take that right on the chin. It is what it is. But if there's a offensive coordinator change here and Cliff Kingsbury goes out and finds a better job, I could easily see Jayden Daniels not being a top 10 quarterback in 2025. It has nothing to do with him as a player. He is an awesome player. For someone that throws as much through the air and deep shot attempts, for him to be basically a 70% completion rate is absolutely disgusting in their first season. I don't really remember a time where I've seen that before. But regardless of the fact, there are variables, whether it's he played injured this year, he could suffer an injury in 2025, he could lose his offensive coordinator who made him look so good that it's possible that, I'm not going to be a cop-out and say sophomore slump, but let's just accept it what it is. When you're that good in your rookie season, there's not that much room for you to get that much better. When you're in a league where, at least in terms of fantasy now, let's just talk, not regular football, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, the only guys better than you. As a rookie, it's very, very hard to get that much better than that. It's very difficult to find a way to even repeat or improve on what you did in your rookie season. So it only makes sense that if you I don't want to say lost a step, didn't play as well, but it's possible he could be not top 10 in 2025. Moving on. Baker Mayfield. Someone that not only has been top 10 2 years in a row, not only someone that lost their offensive coordinator and still finished as a top 5 quarterback the year after, he's improved in terms of his statistics from 2023 to 2024, which is very impressive. Now, I am not sure that it's time for Baker Mayfield to fall off this wagon. Like, it could be very possible we have a back-end QB1 finish. He finishes around 8, 9, or 10. We know that he's a quarterback that can throw for a lot of yards, somebody that can throw for a lot of touchdowns, and the interceptions are just the baggage that comes with it. The interceptions make him from being an elite quarterback in fantasy to a really, really solid quarterback one. That's just what it is. And honestly, the same could be said about Jared Goff. It feels like one of those guys could easily fall out of the top 10. And if I had to pick one over the other, I think losing Ben Johnson for Jared Goff and the Lions is a lot more detrimental than Baker Mayfield losing Liam Cohen after losing Dave Canales to be a head coach of the Carolina Panthers. I think Jared Goff could easily fall out of top 10 status. I don't know if I would be banging on the drum to draft him again, but he for sure is going to be one of those guys that may not have such a high ADP, but given that his back-to-back finishing of a top 10 quarterback, they might finally bump him up inside the top 10 of ADP. And I feel like I would rather go elsewhere than try to take my chance on Jared Goff repeating again. Jalen Hurts at number 7. We know Jalen Hurts is a stud in fantasy. We know he is a cheat code with all of his rushing upside. He gets his touchdowns. He gets his. And being that rushing touchdowns are always going to be worth more than passing touchdowns, he's got to finish as a top 10 guy. He's one of those, big 4 guys that always finishes here. And finally, Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is going to be here, whether you like him or not, whether you have some kind of feeling about him, whether you drafted him as a second-round pick and he didn't deliver. Players aren't going to want to draft him with an early draft pick anymore. But you know in the back of your mind, he's going to finish as a top 10 quarterback. So wherever you get him, yeah, it might feel disappointing. Yeah, it might feel like you didn't get your bang for your buck in terms of ADP. You know exactly what you're getting out of him. A top 10 quarterback. As long as he's healthy, there's no reason to believe that he won't be a top 10 quarterback. So for that, feels like he's got to carry over too. Now let's keep an eye and look at what quarterbacks didn't finish top 10 that could easily do it in 2025. I'm not the biggest fan of this player. Leaving my biases aside, one guy that really sticks out to me is Brock Purdy. Now, Brock Purdy, through 16 games, like everyone else played, missed one game, was still right on the cusp of being a top 10 quarterback. And granted, lost who I think is his best receiver, Brandon Ayuk. Lost his running back, Christian McCaffrey. Like, we know that the narrative is Brock Purdy without the Avengers, he ain't as good. He's going to have the Avengers back next year. George Kittle's not going anywhere. Brandon Ayuk is coming back. Deebo Samuel's coming back and should definitely have a better season than what he did the year before. I feel like it's very possible that he creeps into the top 10 again. Another player that sticks out to me. If they could just get him another receiver, man. Justin Herbert could easily finish top 10. And I was somebody that said that Jim Harbaugh last year was going to kill his career in terms of fantasy and not be that guy anymore. I don't want to say that was true, but I also don't want to say that was untrue. Because with the numbers he had, 21 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, completes 65% of his passes, he should have been a top 10 quarterback. But what holds him back is the weapons and playmakers they put around him. And finally, another player that I feel like has that top 10 upside, I'm not going to say C.J. Stroud. I'm a little too concerned still about what they're going to do at offensive line. If they go out in free agency in the draft and just absolutely stack the O-line for C.J. Stroud, then we have an argument. But for the time being, I'm going to say Caleb Williams. And though he doesn't have the O-line for it, he doesn't need Keenan Allen. He still has playmakers on his team because obviously Keenan Allen's going away in free agency probably. With a new offensive coordinator that actually knows what he's doing, that's not Matt Eberflus, you have to believe that this kid's going to have a bounce-back season. It wasn't even a bad season. Yes, there were a lot of fumbles. Yes, there were a lot of games that they were down and didn't have a chance to win. But he's still that franchise-changing quarterback that we all thought he was a year ago, despite what his rookie season has shown us. So these are some players that I feel like we should be targeting in drafts. They're not going to cost you much. I highly doubt anybody's going to be drafting Caleb Williams in the middle rounds. I doubt anybody towards the back of the draft is going to be like, I got to have Brock Purdy. I don't think that's going to happen either. You know who are the guys that people want to draft, and you know in your league who the guys that aren't going to want to be drafted in your league. And I feel like looking at some of these underrated, overlooked players, those are going to be where you hit on quarterback. When you're looking at what quarterbacks you want to draft, it's not about getting the guy who was really good with one of your early draft picks. It's about getting the guy who completely smashes the expectations of what you drafted him for. If you drafted Joe Burrow in the middle rounds of your draft, that was great. You got a phenomenal season out of Joe Burrow. Was it significantly enough more than what you paid in terms of ADP to win you a championship? Probably not. If you had Joe Burrow and you won a championship, let me know in the comments down below. Debunk my theory completely. Tell me that I'm talking crazy, that I'm out of my mind. But I know for a fact you didn't make it to the championship because you drafted Joe Burrow with one of your really high draft picks, and he turned out and produced how he was supposed to. You make it to the championship by drafting players that exceed that expectations. You needed a Jaden Daniels. You needed somebody that went above and beyond. It's not about how you get them. It's about what it costed to get these players and how much better was the return than what you paid for. Think of it almost like an investment. You want to have the best return on your investment possible. But that's all I have for you guys today. Keep in mind again, I'll say it again, 4 to 6 quarterbacks year over year repeat their top 10 status. So don't go ahead and look at who finished top 10 last year and think that that means they have to do it again. There's going to be guys that got cut off that list. Whether it's because they're just not as good as they were a year ago, whether it's injuries, the list can go on and on. Coordinator changes, can be anything. These guys are not guaranteed to finish again and repeat as top 10 players. If you stuck around for this entire video, I just want to say thank you so much. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe down below. The fantasy football content is not stopping anytime soon. If you aren't new to the channel and you're back for another video, thank you so much. Feel free to like this video so I know to keep making more fantasy football content like this one. I'm sorry that I didn't bring that kind of same energy. I was looking back at what I edited. I am a little exhausted. I did just happen to go for a procedure today, and my doctors did tell me to go home and rest. And I said, nah, you're crazy. I have to make a video for the Outlier Militia. My name is Turtle. This is Outlier Fantasy, and I will see you all in the next video.